actually wanted to cut my hair today before this podcast, but I thought it to be worthwhile for me to actually keep my hair as long as possible. So you can see
Yeah.
how thick my hair is. It's relatively thick and very coily to be basically type 4 hair on this. And welcome back to this episode of the MedTech 101 podcast. And today I have one of my favorite colleagues that I've worked with, Jonathan Binder or Jonny Binder. And Jonny is a product designer. And I think now, Jonny, you're the lead product designer at Paxman. And for those guys who remember, I think it was episode maybe 8 or 9 when I brought Richard Paxman here on the podcast, and Richard is the CEO of Paxman, where Jonny currently works at the moment. But I just wanted to bring Jonny here today to discuss quite a number of things regarding inclusivity when it comes to designing medical devices, because it's something that's sometimes people don't take into consideration when they're creating a medical device or when you're creating a product. So yeah, but without going too long, welcome to the podcast, Jonny.
No, thanks for having me. I'm honoured to be here. It's a great pleasure, and to be able to talk about these sort of things that we're so passionate about and find really exciting and interesting and crucial, to be honest. Hopefully, I'll give you a bit of an insight into that today. So, put that presentation together, and we can talk through some things. And
for those guys who are listening to the audio for this episode, it'll be better if you go over to the YouTube channel and you catch this episode there, because we're going to have some slides that Jonny is going to be presenting on the podcast. And I think this is the first time I do a sort of like a PowerPoint slide on the podcast. So go over to the YouTube channel if you'd like. Otherwise, if you're happy to listen, you can continue listening on the audio.
And I'll do my best to talk through it so that like people who are just listening can be included. So we'll try our best with that.
Thanks, Jonny. So as you can see on the slide, it's a selfie that I took. I think I think it was 2022. Yeah, 2 years ago, when I was working at J&J, because I always stayed in touch with you guys, and I always used to do these trips to Huddersfield to have lunch with you and everything, usually on Fridays, because I used to finish work at 1:30 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. So it gave me sort of like a head start to the weekend, essentially. And that's what I used to travel to Huddersfield from Preston at the time to meet up with you guys. So yeah, it's quite nostalgic, Jonny, that you chose this picture.
Yeah, no, I wanted to kind of get that connection in, just so people who are listening or watching can see that we go back quite well, and you do placement here with us. So
Sure.
It's interesting. Yeah. So just to give the viewers or readers or watchers just a bit of a background to my story, I guess I've boiled it down to the most applicable things to do with medical design and product design and development, that sort of stuff. So going back to school, sixth form in Harrogate, where I did product design, then York College doing an art foundation course, and then basically going from there to the University of Huddersfield, where I've done my bachelor in product design, which included placement, the master's, which completed in 2019, and now my PhD, which I'll talk about, which is largely to do with inclusivity in design. So going back into my sandwich year, did a placement in Elland, which is near Huddersfield, where I was doing my placement, and then during my final year as a new product development lead, working on new product development initiatives. And then almost straight after that, when I started my master's, doing a knowledge transfer partnership associate, which for those who don't know is a three-way collaboration between an associate, which was myself, an academic partner, and an industry partner, which was Paxman. And throughout my time, let's say the past 5-6 years with Paxman, I've been working part-time at Huddersfield University as a PhD researcher in a research centre we established for the Paxman Research Innovation Centre, and also Paxman, and doing some lecturing along the way. So there's a bit of this here and there, kind of just everywhere, big jigsaw puzzle. So we'll move on from that now.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's just quite interesting to see how how you started with Paxman essentially when you were doing your your masters, and that relationship has kind of grown over the years. And for those guys who might not know, Paxman, Brufit, Huddersfield University, they're all in the same or city essentially. So it's like quite effective in terms of if you want it to move around the three places. And in fact, Brufit is a sister company of Paxman. So yeah, and I think
I
if you
think
guys want to
it.
hear more about that, it's Richard spoke about it more in the episode I did with
Yeah.
Richard. So
I,
yeah,
I think it's worthwhile mentioning about just going back to that previous thing about Paxman being like a really great inclusive place to work, and how they pioneer a lot of things, including I would say the collaborations with many people around the world, lots of oncologists and different research centres. You know, like for yourself, you came from a completely different university than Huddersfield,
yes.
and the importance of that collaborative network. So I think that's another thing to mention, and that's why myself, yourself, and a lot of the team came to be in research and development at Paxman through people like
Yes.
Kurt, who over at the University of Huddersfield, bringing in that knowledge network. So yeah, sorry, go on.
Nice, nice.
I'll try
Definitely, I'm
not
just
to
adding on to
mumble.
that. No, it's okay. It's okay, Jenny. Yeah, definitely. I would say Paxman was one of the best places I've worked to date. Even though I've gone on to work for other bigger companies after I left, it was just really good. You know, like if you wanted to be at the forefront of research and getting your hands like working and getting your hands dirty essentially, like Parksman was the place to do it because it's so much responsibility, there's so much accountability. So each person in the team had high visibility because all the work they were doing was quite integral to the team. So that's one thing I really loved. And yeah, and that's how I met Jonny. I met Jonny because when I went to Paxman in 2019? Yes, when I started at
Yeah,
Paxman.
yeah,
Um, I that's how we met, and we are basically working on the same team. June was the product designer. I was more of like an engineer. Because that's what I am. I'm a biomedical engineer, so I was taking that sort of like angle towards the team when we work together. So yeah, I'll move on to the next slide.
yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So yeah, basically just putting this slide in about inclusivity. So obviously we're talking about inclusive design, and our company vision is that in not too distant future, that every single eligible cancer patient, no matter where in the world they are, regardless of ethnicity, financial situations, gender, or treatment regime to do with obviously chemotherapy, has a choice to scalp pool. And together we can achieve this. And that's why I keep hinging on the whole factor of collaboration, because really it has to be done together, and it's bringing different people like yourself from an engineering background, myself who's a bit more like the creative side of the development, and putting brains together essentially and come up with good solutions, hopefully.
So I was just basically saying that it's quite nice what Paxman is doing, because essentially what Paxman aims to do is to create a product that goes across multiple ethnicities, socioeconomic classes and stuff, and this is quite important for medical devices, because it's essentially what we're trying to do for medical devices is to make it reach as many people as possible, and I think getting that inclusive design, so which is what Jonny is going to be talking about more, because it's I think it's something that really motivates me, and I think there's a lot of people listening right now who will be thinking, okay, most of the devices tend to be Eurocentric design, especially the first sort of like more, how do I say, the first models of a device tend to be either Eurocentric, because most of the R&D for these either would have been done in Europe or in the US. So when people do it, they just tend to work with their local groups. But when the device becomes global, then a lot of things change. A lot of things now come into play. And yeah, Johnny, I don't know, yeah, if you want to now tell us more about what inclusive design is.
Yeah, I mean, people can obviously Google these things and fact check me if they want, but I'll try and boil it down for the product design process, because inclusive design can mean many things, and again, it's all subjective to what you're doing. And like you said, I think one of the main things I'll talk about is designing products for people, for real people around the world, rather than X amount of people. Like I said, if it's just Europeans and saying, oh, this will work for the rest of the world, it doesn't work like that. So there's a lot of important factors to consider in inclusive design. And you're right, there are barriers that stop us from getting there, but together we can remove the barriers essentially. So inclusive design is essentially it's a design process to ensure that as many people as possible can use or have access to a product, services, or an environment, for example. So that could mean many things, boiling that down. And some very well established research methodologies that we use, human-centered design thinking, design for elderly, design for improvement, design to improve life, or things like that. And I've just put in a little infographic here, which obviously I'll try and describe for people just listening, but we call it the iterative design or iterative design waterfall feedback loop process. I know it's very long-winded, but a lot of these methodology sections can be. And what that basically means is there's the iterative loops, essentially. Imagine like a coil going on and on and on throughout the design process. You look at the initial requirements, that could be a specification, and then you use the specification, which you collect from multiple stakeholders, processes, people, stakeholders, all these things, yeah. And that feeds your design development process. Then from developing something, you test that with the users and you get feedback. And at the center of that is the people, like the human-centered aspect. So that's always the center of this methodology is there's someone at the center of this. And later on in the presentation, I'll show what the users are, because it could be multiple users. And essentially that keeps going because you'll get feedback.
Right.
And that could be through alpha stage, beta stage, clinical trials, post-market surveillance. There's a lot of mechanisms we use to improve continually our products that come from the users, the people. Yeah.
True,
So,
true. And I think sometimes you never know that there's feedback that needs to happen until the product is actually on the market, and then you start getting that feedback from people. So I know Johnny said post-market surveillance, and that's basically what it is, where you have a medical device that's on the market, and people give you feedback. Because as a manufacturer of a medical device, you have to stay in loop or with the device even after you have sold it to the clients. It's different from for most like tech industries where you don't, once you sell something, you don't really have to follow up. But for us in medical device industry, it's quite important for that to happen. And that's when you realize, okay, oh, maybe it's working in this group. Okay, maybe we need a different size. Maybe we need a smaller size, or we need
yeah.
to make it nicer looking or something. And that's what part of the loop is. And essentially, that's the loop of how things are navigated. And yeah.
Yeah. So moving on to this, the importance of scalp cooling. So I've just picked out some research that is quite prevalent for examples of inclusive design. So what did the inclusive design aspects look like for scalp cooling? So again, it's all subjective. For us, scalp cooling requires a lot of cranial anthropology studies. So and because we're in over 60 countries worldwide, that means a lot of different complexities from different ethnic backgrounds, different environments of use, regulatory systems. They all have different things that you need to account into this process throughout, to be honest. So one statistic that I wanted to show was obviously in the research and development department, we constantly doing publications, and you can access them from the internet if you just search Paxman research, etc., on our website. And basically, our product, because it's one on the head, as a wearable heat exchanger, it requires close fit for optimal efficacy. So if you've got a close fit and everyone's different hair types, different head shapes, these are all going to affect slightly what kind of efficacy you're going to get. And because everyone's different, everyone's got different head shapes and stuff. So when I say one size fits all will never work for everyone, you'll get a level of efficacy, but to get optimal efficacy past 80% success rate, so for us, hair retention, you need to get a more personalized fit. So customization or mass customization is an approach that we heavily research. So, like I said, we're in over 60 countries, and the global variations that, again, some of these things can get overlooked that you might not consider. But because we're so heavily involved in it, these are always part of our thought processes. So the global variations could be the head shape, it could be the size, hair type, the proportions of the head, the sex, ethnicity, and things like that. So I've given some examples on the right where we've we show the head shape examples, and some of you will never have heard these terminologies before, but it's something called the cephalic index, which is essentially just a mathematical equation for determining the proportions of a person's head. And this can vary from different continents, or just even massively vary. So boiling that down to three main types in terms of research, you've got brachycephalic, which is a wide skull, where you might have a shorter head but very wide face. Dolichocephalic, which is the complete opposite of that, where it's very narrow and long skull. And then mesocephalic, which is basically the middle, round skull. And then alongside that, another big hurdle would be hair types. And you've got sort of like completely straight, thin hair. You've got thin, wavy hair, curly hair, and thick, coily hair. So all these different things that need to be considered. And the reason I'll mention the coily hair versus the thin hair is if you are, like you said, designing Eurocentric design, people like yourself that have got more coily hair, that's way more insulating. So I'm actually doing a publication at the moment that focuses on type 3-4 hair and how we can address that better for designing products to overcome
Definitely.
those barriers, essentially. And they're crucial, obviously. So it's very interesting research, though, of course.
Yeah,
So yeah.
definitely. I think it's quite interesting, Johnny. And just to take a step back here for people who don't know what we're talking about or what the medical device actually does, I'll be putting pictures on top of the video of what it looks like. But for those people listening, it's basically a cap that you wear on your head, and it circulates a coolant. And the principle is that by cooling your scalp, there's several reasons as to why it helps you retain your hair whilst you going through chemotherapy treatment for certain types of cancers, and so because of that, it's like wearing a beanie essentially. And The way I like to look at it is to say, okay, and almost beanies like wrap around your head, and to get that nice fit around your head means the better the contact you have with your beanie, the warmer you are. In this particular case, the better the contact you have with the cap, the higher the efficacy you have. So that's the research Johnny is doing, where Johnny is looking at different, hair types. And talking about hair, I actually wanted to cut my hair today before this podcast, but I thought it to be worthwhile for me to actually keep my hair as long as possible. So you can see
Yeah.
how thick my hair is. It's relatively thick
Mm.
and very like coily to be basically type 4 hair on this. And just from a physics point of view, the things you have to do to cool the scalp is different compared to, for instance, Johnny's hairs, which is a little bit thinner than mine. So if I'm wrong, Johnny, just to add on to what some of the things that which is also being done as part of the inclusivity is that I think for people with afro hair like mine, they have to have the scalp cooling for a little bit longer than usual. Correct? Is it half an hour longer? I forgot the time now.
Yeah, so essentially all this can be found on our website if you want to read into it more. But we have like an amazing marketing department, and basically they've come out with some new procedures essentially. So it's like divvying it up and tailoring it. It's another form of mass customization where if you have thicker coily hair, you'll need to do certain things and vice versa. So there's certain things like it'd be for the users, the nurses or healthcare professionals, it would be different cooling times, but also different hair preparations. So how you can get it prepared before you put the quotation mark beanie on before you cool. And you're right, basically just the basic mechanism boiling down what the wearable heat exchanger, the scalp cooling cap is something that
Right.
induces vasoconstriction. And something that's worth mentioning is that the scalp acts completely different from the rest of the body. Your brain is one of the most important organs, so it's going to protect that the most. So it's going to generate a lot of heat. And when you're cooling, the response to that will be constantly fighting it. So there's many biological challenges to overcome in the design process, which we've done. That's fine. But then there's the other ones like hair type, head shape. We have significantly good efficacy already, but how do we make it better? How do we make it more accessible for people? So we're always trying to make it better and involve more and more to make it better for everyone. So you're right. There will be different procedures, different product development, different processes, instructions, videos, hair preparation. There's all these things that we try and consider to make it as best experience as possible, which is the going through the process, the before, to kind of like make you feel a bit more confident in it. And also afterwards, like your hair retention, the confidence, the psychosocial impacts of that, it goes throughout the
True.
entire thing. So,
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that people have, because sometimes the reason why it's important to keep your hair, as you said, the confidence part, and is just some people want to keep that they're going through treatment as something that's private to them. They don't want people knowing that they're going through this particular
yeah.
type of treatment, and sometimes there's also like a psychological aspect to receiving any treatment, right? Because obviously, if you lose your hair and stuff, it's like sometimes they get that sort of like psychological shock. And I think,
Mm.
just talking from most of my, from the perspective of most female friends I have, they care about their hair. It forms a huge part of their identity. So,
Yeah.
whereas
And
I
I
know for
think,
some guys, yeah. Sorry,
no,
Johnny.
no,
Yeah.
carry on. Sorry.
And I was just gonna say, for some guys, I know like it also plays a huge part of our identity. But as guys, sometimes we accept that at some point in our lives we're gonna get bored. Well, there's a huge chance that we'll get bored, and so it's not as heavy. As I would say, from the friends that I've seen. However, it's still something that worries people, right? Because even if someone is going bold, they still start worrying about it in terms of self identity,
Yeah.
self confidence, etc. So yeah, you were saying, Johnny. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say just basically because we've done psychosocial impact studies with including like our current, previous, and post patients and stuff in our pioneer group, Facebook groups, etc. And we've done this as like a post-market surveillance, pre-market surveillance, that sort of stuff. And in our psychosocial impact, some of the main things that are attributed to, let's say motivations for scalp calling is some things people might not even think about. You could be a mother with a young child and you're going through chemotherapy and you want to avoid those awkward conversations like why is mummy losing her hair? So that allows you to retain that like that strong independence, privacy kind of like,
True.
and that follows through to work life, exercise life. You might not want people to know. You might not want the questions. You might want to just get on with your life and go about business as usual. And it really is about keeping that privacy and the degree of control. Because, like, obviously, cancer takes quite a lot from you mentally, physically, just time, everything. So if you can keep your, like you said, for some people it's their identity. It's like it helps. It helps with your mental health to
Yeah.
be able to just that's it. You have no idea. I'm going through chemotherapy, for example. So
True.
definitely,
Makes sense.
it's very important motivations behind it.
I definitely agree with you, Johnny. I agree. It makes sense, and I know it's valuable information. That's why I wanted, to give this chance to for people to hear some of this work, because it would be nice if every approach could be taken. And yeah, so now I'm just on the next slide.
Yeah, so just giving it an example of this, and to be fair, we can try and give some examples that might benefit other industries as well. Obviously, I'm just
Yes.
giving Paxman as the case study, so that's for a wearable device. One when I joined officially, also I'd done work experience part time during my studies, but when I officially joined in 2018, I started doing my transfer partnership, and the whole thing about that was basically inclusive design, which was they had just this one type, which was three sizes, which was developed a couple of years before that. And then as the company grows and goes into more and more countries, there was the whole Asian market to consider. There's completely different barriers with that, different sizes and shapes. So, like I said, brachycephalic, which is basically wide skulled, shallow, not shallow, no, isn't that what you call it? In length, like more shallow in length, but wider. So an example I'm giving here is a HOPE study. Is what the research
Yeah. So
publication is
I
called.
think I can.
HOPE
I think
study.
I can zoom in close actually.
Yeah, go for it. So yeah, so that's the difference there between the previous and the current. And this was my job was to develop a new cap for Asian markets based on the different head shapes and sizes and proportions and things like that. So there's a quick comparison there, Caucasian and Asian, between the Western and Eastern, we'll call.
Yeah.
And then the images that you see here are from a clinical trial where they tried to use the current cap. If you go down, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where they tried to use the current cap and said, will this be efficacious? Of course, there was some hair retention, but there was bald patches, and that's because the head shapes and sizes and proportions were all different. And essentially, this instigated the need for a new cap type, which is what I developed in my knowledge transfer partnership, to prevent essentially the bald patches that were occurring around the crown of the head.
True.
And this was a study done on Japanese women. And then not long after developing this device, we got Minsho showing approval, which is Japanese regulatory compliance. And that's probably all I'll say with that one. To be honest, I could go on for ages, but yeah,
Nice.
that was a
Yeah.
new design for inclusivity.
Nice. It's really it's amazing, Jenny. You know the type of work it is, and I like the photos it shows in terms of where it was lacking. So it's basically going back to the loop you mentioned as part of the design principle that you constantly come back to and see and get more feedback from the market in terms of how the device is performing in the market and get back and continue making those improvements. So yeah, and then now I think we're going to be talking mostly about like the differences between mass customization and mass personalization because I think they sound the same. From like a layman's point
Yeah.
of view, like customizing something and personalizing it is kind of the same. So like, what's the main differences, Johnny, when it comes to product design for medical devices?
Yeah, so if you think, again, if you want to boil it down, mass customization or customization in general is an inclusive process. What you might most commonly refer to that is if you think about buying something for your partner on Valentine's Day, you want to get them a mug that's personalized with a cute little photo of it. That's personalized, like that's something that, not personalized, that's customized. That's an existing product that you have adjusted through set parameters, okay? So that is essentially customization, which is there might be an existing product that could be capped, but you give more options for fine tuning it. Okay, so the general product would stay the same, but you add little bits to it. So that could be, like I said then, development of a brachycephalic or Asian market cap. So the current cap exists, but it's just slightly, you get options to, I'm actually this size, so I could be 60 centimeters circumference, could be 58 centimeters circumference, but also my proportions might be different. So there's levels of customization. And when it comes to the personalization, this is where I say we move into a more bespoke approach. And that could be every person has a very specific thing that is designed exactly for them. And, the only real way to achieve those sort of things in our studies is through industry 4 applications like 3D printing. So if you look on the left, it's basically expanding the range of existing products so that there's more room for, I could be this, 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 or this, from let's say 20 different options. But with the one on the right, it's this is what I am. I need that design exactly for me. If that makes sense. So
Nice, makes sense.
bespoke.
So
Yeah.
so would we say then technically personalizing the caps is better for individuals, but however, moving towards customization is also better for individuals, but it's not on the same level of depth as the bespoke
Yeah.
sort of like design. And just out of quick curiosity, Johnny, would you say it takes longer to personalize than to customize? What did you say?
Again, that depends on the application. So if you were to think about supply or the supply chain, then if we have 6 types of cap and we can project that we will have X amount of this size, X amount of that size, we can get them in ahead of time. You can plan forward for that. So there will be some level of supply and demand, or different types of business strategies. With the bespoke thing, it really is. I would say a little bit more complex. So that requires maybe a healthcare professional to gather the data, send that back, designers to input that into some sort of software, generate it 3D printed, send it off. So there's a lot more steps because it's not standard, it's bespoke.
Nice, nice, makes
So
sense,
yeah,
makes sense.
hopefully that
I,
makes a bit of sense.
It does, and I think to add on to that, I just thought of something right now off the top of my head. It's like when you buy a suit, like a formal suit. When you go into
Exactly.
like the shop, like there's like three ranges. There's one that you get like off the shelf, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
just like that, and then you get one that they call made to measure. And I think in this case, that's what's the mass customization. And then after that, then the higher end of it is the bespoke ones, So the bespoke ones are personally made for your own measurements, your own body proportions, etc. And as you go up, from ones off the rack, one made to measure and one just bespoke, the higher the time it takes to make one of those. But sometimes you might
Yeah.
be lucky as an individual and just have proportions of your body that will be fine with something off the rack, but some those that tends to be sort of like the cliche mannequin, then it's usually designed around that. But then obviously
Yeah.
our bodies don't really look like mannequins and stuff, and we might have to
Mm.
change it and stuff. So that's how I see it in terms of like how you move in design, moving towards that, and I think that's a good explanation for people to know. So is to say now this is how you're approaching this, and this just this doesn't just have to happen for scalp cooling caps. This could happen also on the other CIPN machine journey that we worked on. And for those people who don't know what the CIPN machine is, it's basically sort of like another device that's meant to reduce the side effects of chemotherapy. In this time, in particular, something called peripheral neuropathy, which is pins and needles in your limbs, essentially. So, but we have another design, but also the same cooling principle, but it's like you have to wear it. So it's essentially like wearing a wrap. And again, this kind of measurements, of mass customization will improve those the efficacy in the patients that will be using that device. So yeah, I just had to add that in there as well, Johnny, just to give it a wider
No,
perspective.
it's a fair point. I will say that the application is different and it doesn't require as close contact. So it's less important than the scalp
Yeah.
because your hands, your peripherals, hands and feet, don't produce as much heat because they are considered by the body as perishable compared to your vital organs, which it considers crucial. So they'll protect them, and it will easily just say, "I don't need the hands, I need the head, I need the brain." So do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's a lot more to combat with the scalp, so you need the closer fit. But you're right, the better you can tailor treatment in almost anything, the better the outcome's going to be. Yeah, yeah. So, just going on to, I'm currently doing a PhD, of course. I'm hopefully not that far off getting it done. But my expertise in this will be cranial anthropology, all these things that we're discussing today, making things more accessible and looking at an approach to bespoke customization or personalization. So this looks at both aspects of customization and personalization. That's why I make the definition beforehand. Um, and this PhD is with the University of Huddersfield and Paxman. And it's an iterative approach of customization and personalization in cranial anthropology for wearable medical product development. And what that means is how can we improve cooling by considering all these different aspects for making it more inclusive. Inclusivity being how do I make it tailored or bespoke. And the approach that is mainly looked at is the Industry 4 3D printing approach. So if I boil that down into the three phases of what that means for the research, phase one was looking at what parameters. So that was doing a full academic study with over 175 papers, looking at the literature that exists on cranial anthropology, head shape, sizes, cephalic index, etc., etc., and finding out what are the most crucial aspects you need. Because you don't want it to be like, oh, I could take thousands of measurements, but realistically, there's users on the other end of that who's going to collect that data. So the parameters that you're showing here, there's a list of those, and they're in several publications at the moment as they've been developed throughout the years. But boiling it down to the most simple approach, because we don't want it to be too taxing and become a barrier for nurses or healthcare professionals. We want to make it as easy and accessible for them to give the most accurate data in the least amount of time, which is the least invasive approach for giving a really good close fit. Now we've the second aspect of that, like I said, healthcare professionals. That is what approach is best to use those parameters with healthcare professionals with those main aspects. And then the final aspect after that is how do we create a cap from that? What's the channel to get it from? What parameters? How it's collected, and then how we process that information. How do we actually make a 3D printed cap from that? So that's taking the data, putting it into a software perhaps, and then generating a 3D printed cap and sending it off. So that is the direct manufacturing approach, rather than we've
Nice.
got 6 or 7 caps or however many it might be. So there's the parallel, and
Nice.
when I've got a very confusing term that I love to use when it comes to this inclusive design approach, which is, and it gets people thinking because it's a bit of nonsense, which is when you're designing a product, there's users and users. And what I mean by that is, I've given a list here, but for people just listening on the left, that means a user could be the patient, the one that's going to wear the cap. It could be a family member. That could be like the family members is in the partner that's coming to help, make sure they're all right, be there for support, or it could be someone close to you. And if you think about it in the design process, if you've got someone that's close to you, you want to give them the most absolute best possible chance they can at X, Y, Z, whatever it is. In this case, keeping their hair as possible. So I like to employ that throughout. I like to always think that it's a good motivator when you're designing something to not be blasé with it and just say, hey, this could be my family member, so I've got to give it my all, right? And then again, other users, nurses, healthcare professionals, manufacturers, sales team, oncologists, right? Designers and trainers. So the people who are training the nurses how to use it, the manufacturers of like how they actually got to assemble it, sales team, they need to know about the product and how best to approach those sort of things. And yeah, I've already mentioned about the parameters, so I guess we can
Nice.
move on
And
from
just
this one.
yeah, yeah, just to add on to that, Johnny, I was just thinking right now because one of the things you mentioned here in particular was, the hair types. So
Mm.
there might be people thinking that okay, you know what, I got like an afro, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
like as a hairstyle, and how would they work with the cap around that? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Johnny, but how they usually do it for that is that they simply wet the hair so it can sort of like even no matter how what hair type you have, if you
Mm.
wet it enough, it will basically become like sort of, it will just lay down essentially, and then you wear the cap around that. So and your
Yeah,
scalp shape stays the same regardless of what hairstyle you have.
yeah, and obviously, even when you try and do those sort of things, if you've got like afro hair, for example, it's very difficult because it's pretty tough. You've got to work
Yeah.
with that sort of stuff, and we would never want like there are patients that have done chemical straightening, and you're like, no, you don't want to lose that beautiful like afro curly hair. You want to keep it because I think chemical straightening is basically irreversible. Like it'll have to just grow out, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
After that.
and sometimes you burn, and sometimes the chemical straightening, Johnny, actually
Mm.
causes alopecia. Sometimes
Yeah.
because it essentially burns the hair follicles. So what we're trying to do here, we're trying to help you prevent that hair loss. So the
Mm.
last thing they'll want is for you to put
House, yeah.
chemicals that
Yeah.
actually might cause hair loss. And then
Yeah.
so yeah, there's ways to work around that, and I think it's a really good approach to also say that
Mm.
the users of a medical device aren't only people who essentially wear the device, but the people who work around it, whether it's
Mm.
the nurses, the doctors, the people who operate it and stuff. So, and I think it was also quite interesting when we were designing the different interfaces for different people.
Mm.
So yeah, but I think that would be a
Yeah.
story for another day.
Well, just to quickly touch on that, I think that's
Yeah,
important to mention is that when you are considering the users, and often we heavily focus on the nurses and the healthcare professionals, because think of it this way: if someone gives you a phone to work and you've never used it before, but it's really complex, and then
yeah,
you've got a phone next to it which is dead simple and easy and you love it, which one do you want to use more? You want to be using the one that's more simple and more accessible and easier and more fun. Do you know what I mean? So you want to be taking that approach rather than like this is how it is, deal with it. Like we don't like that approach. We take the right. You tell us what you're thinking. How can we make it better? And because that directly boils down to the patients at the end of the day. If
yeah.
we're making the nurses experience less enjoyable, then that's going to even affect the patients. So we've got to make everyone everyone's opinions heard in the design process. Because if you don't, then you're not going to get a good product, and that's where the
Sure.
collaboration comes together. You've got to work with a lot of people to make a good cake. You know?
Definitely, and I think the same approach works even when it works for other medical devices. Because when I was
Mm.
working at J&J on the hip and knee replacement implants, essentially we also design those around the surgeons or the doctors essentially will be using that, because even
Mm.
though we got a patient who has the device sort of like implanted in them, the patient is probably going to be just, well, in this case, on the operating table, unconscious. So technically,
Yeah,
they're not really using it. They use it because they
yeah.
get to wear it, but they don't actually put it in place. So yeah,
Mm.
it's how we define things in medical device industry, and which is quite
Yeah,
different from other industries, and that's why I quite like this industry, because we quite picky with how we describe things and how we do things. It's highly regulated.
yeah, absolutely.
And then one of the other things which I was going to add on was the importance of collaboration in terms of like with all the work you've been doing, Jenny. I know you did the KTP, which basically stands for Knowledge Transfer Program, I think, and
Partnership, yeah.
partnership. Thank
Hmm.
you. So knowledge
Hmm.
transfer partnership, which is basically like it's a triad, right? It's like the university, you as an individual, and a company and industry. So you
Hmm.
basically sharing information,
Yeah.
around these three entities,
Hmm.
and and I think that's how you've started in terms of working on your master's degree, and now your PhD. How would you say that's been helpful towards this?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Collaboration is key. You could work in a closed box and come up with something that might be technically viable, but you've got to consider the other aspects, viability and feasibility and desirability. You know, so is it desirable? Does the end users want that thing? Is it viable? Okay, yes, it works, but maybe it costs thousands to make versus, if you can optimize it, it could be hundreds to make. And then feasibility. Like, yes, it works, but it's really uncomfortable, so maybe it's not feasible because I can't tolerate it. So there's a lot of different aspects, and the only way you can really get out of that narrow focus is to walk different walks of life. You've got to go to the experts. You've got to bring in skill sets. You've got to embed knowledge. You've got to transfer knowledge. You've got to work together. So collaboration is absolutely essential. And like I've honestly loved working with all these different universities, the different people that I meet throughout work, like yourself, like just completely new perspectives of how someone might approach a problem. And I've given some examples on the screen here. So University of
Yeah.
Huddersfield, obviously still there. Netherlands Comprehensive Cancer Organisation. So we've got Karina van der Herk over there and doing some research, which is great. National University of Singapore, our Singapore partners who have helped us develop this CIPN device for clinical trials. University of Leeds, where engineering departments are helping us with some technical aspects. King's College London, again, biology partners looking in different areas. Sheffield Hallam. There's so many to talk about, and there's many oncologist networks we work with around the world. So really, it's disruptive if you think about it. You could stay stagnant. You might have graduated university 10 years ago, and you know the state of the art from 10 years ago. And of course, you'll do your job and you'll learn things along the way. But when you bring in new perspectives, new people who have just graduated, they might tell you about like, oh, there's this new interesting thing with AI, or there's a completely new treatment process. A new drug just got released last week. Like, there's all these completely different perspectives where you've got to lean on like engineering, textiles, production, just think about it as endless. If you're developing something, why wouldn't you seek these new perspectives and the expert skill sets to
True.
transfer that knowledge? It's really how you win.
Yes, sorry, Johnny. Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Same.
No, just want to add on to that to say that sometimes most of the R&D or most of the research and development that leads to the new product you get, whether at home or in the hospital, tends to be a collaboration of many partners, right? So because
Mm.
you'd have like sort of like in this particular case, the guys at the universities, they tend to be sort of research driven. They do research on this for years. For instance, I'll give you an example. The CIPN machine, which we are talking about earlier, which is going to be the new device Paxman is going to be bringing to market. I think the guys were doing research on that, Johnny, for much longer before actually
Yeah.
started working. Before we actually started working with them on the to try to create a product that will be market ready. So by the
Mm.
time the product gets to the market, the research should have probably been like for 10 years prior to that to make sure that it's safe, to make sure that it's gonna work, because you don't want to bring something that's not safe, that's not gonna work, or that's not
Mm.
better than the current, traditional method of treatment for whatever illness it might be.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice to see all these partnerships, and by doing this as well, it kind of shares the costs. It spreads the cost, because if one company tried to do all this research, I think it'll be too much for one person to do it. But for instance, the University of Huddersfield will have its own separate pots of funding from the National University of Singapore. So when you then connect the minds, connecting minds essentially from two different parts of funding, or different strands, and it comes together nicely into
Mm.
one product that you see on the market. So it's quite interesting. You mentioned that, Johnny. I think it shows also the collaboration that's been happening around the world. But we do have to give Paxman the credit of pulling the minds together into one building essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. And for that one, CIPN was an unmet clinical need. So, like the challenges of doing something that is novel and never been done before, that takes a long time. Whereas there might be some other things
Yes,
that there's years and years of research already exists on a certain thing, and that's a bit easier because there's not all that extra foundation work to do. So,
definitely.
again, subjective. If you're doing something completely new, it's going to be really challenging. But if you do something, redesigning something that's already existing, then you've got something that exists already to kind of like work from. So, and then again, that's the collaboration side of things. You'll
Nice.
hinge on people who have 20, 30 years experience in a particular type of production, but you want to expand and develop that production type. Do you know what I mean? So, got to work together.
Definitely.
It's
And
crucial.
also one thing as well that's quite nice about this is the geographical diversity you get from this collaboration. So if you're
Yeah.
basically trying to work to create something that's inclusive and encompassing of all different ethnicity groups, etc., it's easier to pair up with a university, let's say
Mm.
maybe in different parts of the world, because they already have huge sample populations they can get the data from. For instance, if
Yeah.
you just try to collect the data from the UK alone, even though the UK is quite diverse as a country, you kind of limited to you'd have to dig really hard to find
Mm.
Afro hair, or Asiatic hair, etc. Compared if you try to get the same data, either in Africa or in Asia, it'd be much easier, which then comes out, together as creating new sort of like funnels of inclusivity
Mm.
into this medical device, which is something which I think is really important and nice. And yeah, that's
And
one thing
of
I wanted
course,
to add. Yeah,
no, I think expanding on that, that also like that's a really important factor. That's why I say it's important to consider different ethnicities and different backgrounds because
yes,
when you're considering a thermoregulatory response to something, if you've grown up in Africa, your response to cooling may be a lot worse because tolerability of cold, you're not exposed to it, you're not used to it. Versus
true,
someone that is basically Nordic and lives in the snow, they're going to be maybe completely fine. There's a lot of variation, and then you've got anatomical differences. You're a product of your environment of what you grew up in quite a lot. So, if you grew up in the mountains versus if you grew up in a city, there's different responses to certain things, and you need to understand those mechanisms. I think so.
true,
Yeah.
true. And yeah, and then just keeping an eye on the time. But before
Oh,
we move,
sorry.
I just want to add something quickly to that. Talking about the code, actually, I think like when I got to university, because obviously I'm from Zimbabwe, but before this I went to high school in South Africa, and then I went to university in Nottingham. And when I got there, first year, like I was really cold, I was struggling with the cold, etc. And the head of department at the time asked me, Rodney, what do you think could have been done for international students coming here? And one of the things I mentioned was if they taught us, with those one slide in the preparation kit on how to
Mm.
dress, it would have made a huge difference, because I didn't know you had to wear thermals, those like these long johns,
Yeah.
or thermal, sort of like tights that you wear underneath your clothes, as layering essentially when it's really cold. And again, that comes down to how our body dissipates heat, and etc., and our different temperatures, our sort of like resting
Mm.
body temperatures from different parts of the world. So it's
And I'm
quite
sure there
nice
were
when you look at it. Yeah.
I'm sure there were conversations when you came to do placement with us, and you were there all wrapped up in winter, and I was there in shorts and t-shirt, and you were like, "Johnny, what's wrong with you?" Anyway, sorry, conscious of
Yeah, I
time.
remember. Yeah, of course, I know, but I think that also comes down to your size. There's this,
Yeah,
there's it's quite important when you look at the ratio of how the
yeah,
body gets rid of heat. So if someone with a smaller body, though, they're more likely to feel colder much
mm-hmm.
faster than someone with a bigger body, just from a surface area point of view.
Cool.
And then there's also the muscle mass that goes into that also helps you keep warm. But
Mm.
like, what I wanted to ask now, Johnny, was like, just to ask about your thoughts on the future in terms of what you
Mm.
think this inclusivity is going. Like, do you think we're going to be able to do this more better? Is it going to be more financially feasible? Because I'm sure there might be other designers listening right now that be thinking, okay, we would really love to make this personal, make it more
Yeah.
personalized for our patients and stuff. But from the cost of things, do you think things will be better, or just your thoughts in general on the future? I know you put a few points on the slide. I'll let you
Yeah.
go through them now here.
Well, maybe I won't go for the points just yet, but I think something that's quite important to note is from what you said, my thoughts on the future and can we make things more inclusive? Absolutely. I think the way that product designers or designers and innovators in general look at the world is there's opportunities everywhere, and we're typically quite disruptive in the sense of people are resilient to change, whereas designers and innovators and product designers like ourselves, we welcome change and we see opportunities where maybe others don't. And the whole thing of technology changing and adapting, and people thinking that they're scary things, maybe because they don't understand them. But like we always research stuff, we always went to understanding what's our symbiotic nature with these new technologies. So AI, for example, AI concept generation, people might think, oh, as a designer, it's going to take my job. No, it's going to improve your job. It's going to make it better. It's going to just be so much greater. So we've done research into AI, and we've got an exhibition on the moment, and I think that's amazing. We love it. So other things like 3D printing, technology becomes exponentially more developed every year on year, and we go and explore these sort of things at conventions and exhibitions and things like that. And I think these sort of things will remove barriers that it could previously 10 years ago 3D printing was not viable because it's so expensive and it's not accessible and it wasn't big enough. And now it's like, okay, there's like thousands of different companies that can do that. There's medical grade materials and the price is lower and they print faster and they print larger and all these sort of things. And then, of course, with the UK at the moment, they're really, really heavily investing in R&D, and I think these are beautiful. It's a beautiful time to be alive, I can tell you that. So we've got all these opportunities of funding, and the government's just really trying to push for that. Like, how can we, bring back innovation? How can we be world leading in this again? And like all these opportunities that are, in healthcare and AI and the STEM fields and there's just so much going on, and I think with all these universities as well, they can just enable that, like the opportunities for new skill sets. And I think it really is like it is a time to just be an innovator. It's wonderful. So yeah, and just point out the photos that I put in there just shows how goofy we are in R&D, and we just take life how it comes. And me as a painful optimist, I will always say that I'm very optimistic, and I always say that it's going to be great, it's going to be good. Don't worry. Like there's so many opportunities, but that's coming
Sure.
from an optimist. So I don't give it a
Sure.
negative response to me on the future. Yeah,
Makes
there
sense.
you go.
Definitely. No, that's really nice, and I'm happy you mentioned quite a lot of things there. You said AI is not going to be a threat. In fact, AI is going to help us. Just going to be a tool, essentially, that humans can use towards achieving this for other medical devices. But I was just wondering, Johnny, do you think there's more heavy emphasis on medical devices that are mostly sort of like tight fitting? For instance, the scalp cap, which is quite a tight fit in terms of
Mm.
trying to get the push out there to for either mass customization or mass personalization, in comparison to maybe for instance, some medical devices where maybe you got a bit more wiggle room in terms of like measurements when you're
Mm.
creating this for the general population. Do you think the inclusive approach can also happen for those ones which are quite general, as much as we say it's important for the ones that are quite tight fitting? Or what do you think? What do you think
Yeah.
there should be inclusiveness in terms of design the most?
So I think this is where goes back to it's subjective, and I
Mm,
think this is where identifying the needs, and when you look at any innovation project, there's certain criteria for the initiation of the project. Is there a need? Is there a market for it? What's the challenge behind it? Is there a challenge? Is it novel? Is it existing? Do people want it? Actually, is quite important. It's like saying there might exist a product already, and we can make it infinitely better. But do people want that? And do they want
yes.
what comes with that? If you make something better, it increases the price, maybe
Yes.
changes a lot of different things. Maybe just they don't, users or customers or patients, they don't want it. So you've really got to look at certain things and say, is there a need? Is there a challenge? Is there a market? Is there something that requires me to instigate the development of this thing? So I think in niche markets, you might get like a group of very enthusiastic people that exactly they just want that, and that might
Yes.
be enough grounds to say I want this. But then, you know, it goes back to like iPhones. Perhaps I'm trying not to say too much. You know what I mean? But like, do I get a
Yeah.
new iPhone each year, or do I wait a
Yeah.
couple of years? Like, how do I justify it as a consumer? Like,
Makes sense.
I have an iPhone. Do I can How do I justify it as a consumer? That increase from the previous year warrants me spending X amount. Yes, I
True.
might want the faster speed, but do I want to pay the extra every year? Do
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like,
Makes sense.
there's a lot of different ways to approach those sort of things,
Nice.
and that's my opinion of it. There's
Nah,
got to be a need for these things, and if there's a
true.
need, there's a market. If there's a market, etc., etc.
Definitely, definitely, and I think one more, just what I just thought right now is also a way to make it easier for companies to have a more inclusive approach is to just generally diversify the clinical trials, because sometimes I was reading an article that was also saying that sometimes in clinical trials, even for drugs, whether it's pharmaceutical drugs or medical
Mm.
devices, they don't have much diversity there. So you might find that the way a drug works in a particular ethnicity is not necessarily the
Yeah,
same way to work in a different ethnic group. So again, just trying to get it, right from the very start, I think is the best way to do that. And this is easier in terms of financially, geographically, by teaming up with other companies in different places, etc. So yeah, and I
yeah,
think I think that was really quite knowledgeable. I still learned a few things from this episode today that we
mm.
did, and yeah, and I don't know, Jenny, do you have any last tips you'd want to tell us about what people should look at? What do you think the how do I say it? Like maybe some new ways of design that are gonna come and stuff. Because I know the way you think.
Mm.
You're a product designer. I think you're a good designer. I think, to be honest, Johnny, you could even
Well,
start a fashion brand even if you wanted, because the way you're designing the wraps and stuff, and
yeah.
people would buy. But do you think there's new approaches that could be done to design that are currently not conventional at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, some tips and tricks, like advice I would give, and I've pretty much said it throughout, is that don't be scared of change. Be adaptive, be disruptive in the right instances, and be willing and open to other views. Those will lead you to a lot of interesting research and success. Really, I think you've got to accommodate for those sort of things. And design is not a linear process, so think of it like a tree that branches off. There's all these different branches that might develop. If you cut it off, that's it. You're not going to get the apple from that branch, are you? So you've got to just just collaborate. Yeah, I think that's what I would say. Try not to go
Thanks.
too much into more, but yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and yeah, so yeah, that's it for today's episode. And thank you very much, Johnny, for coming on the MedTech 101 podcast. And I think
Thanks for having me.
this will shed some light into some of the fantastic work you're doing, out there, and that's good.
Fantastic work that we're doing, as a group, as a team,
Yes,
not just
yes.
me. We're all
We
doing.
we
Yes, yeah,
of course I'll correct myself. I say it's fantastic work you guys are doing, since,
yeah,
as I
yeah,
said, everything works as a collaboration, and it's quite beautiful to see that. So yeah, thank
absolutely.
you very much.
Yeah. No, cheers for having me on, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon. So yeah, right.